Hello, everybody. My name is Rodrigo Correia. I am from Talking EFL, and today we have the biggest honor to be talking here to Ms. Professor John Hattie. Professor John Hattie wrote a couple of years ago a book called Visible Learning, and since then he has been doing in some research, collecting information worldwide. And today he's here giving us the honor to talk about this book and also about his research. And I kind of have to say thank you to Fabiana Muliterno, our colleague here from Talking FL, who managed to invite Mr. Hattie. She bravely sent him an email and he kindly replied saying yes. So Professor Hattie, welcome to Talking FL. It's a big honor to have you here. Okay, and that's it. So thank you very much for doing this to us. And what's the name of your dog, by the way?
That's Patterson.
Patterson.
Patterson, and that's Edna.
Hey, Edna. Okay, so welcome, Mr. Hattie. Welcome to Talking FL.
Buenos dias to you, and it's I love talking about this stuff, so I was delighted to have the opportunity.
Okay, fantastic. So my first question for you is, in your book, Visible Learning, you bring lots of arguments defending that teachers are the most important element for impact or impactful learning in the classroom. What concrete actions can teacher take in order to make that impact happen or to cause that impact?
Well, in many ways, it should not surprise anyone that teachers are amongst those who have the highest impact on students. And then, as you ask, what is the nature of it? It's very, very hard to get it down to a short answer, even though I'm going to have a go at it, because there is no one right way. And I think much of our focus has been on how teachers teach. But what the visible learning work says, it's more about how they think and evaluate what they do and how they do it. And I'm sure, like in your country and mine, there's many professional learning sessions on how we teach. Here are resources. This is what I do. Come and watch me. But we forget that it's about those moment-by-moment decisions that teachers are making, those evaluative judgments about what's working, what's not working, with whom, about what the magnitude is. And this is why I have moved very much to this notion of knowing thy impact, because it begs those questions. What do you mean by expectations? What is your impact? Who's getting this impact? To what level of magnitude? And so focusing more on the thinking of it rather than the teaching methods, I would argue, is the shift that I want to make in this literature. And the bad news is that it's very hard to see how teachers think. It's a lot easier to go and watch them. But what we do when we go and watch them is we have our own beliefs and our own theories about how we teach. And too often we don't adjust those or change those. We just pick and choose the bits that we like and incorporate, and we miss the incredible opportunity. I'm just stunned as I go around the world and see teachers in action with remarkable impacts on kids, and then hearing them think. It's quite dramatic.
Okay, I see. And then this comes to the preparation of the lessons, brings me to think about the preparation of the lessons. And then this is something that you also make a strong point on, how we should plan the lessons, taking into consideration how much we know, or how aware are we of the students' cognitive level, for instance. And could you explain how is that? So when it comes to the preparation of the lessons, what's more important, it's not necessarily the syllabus, but how am I going to reach these or that particular student? Is that right?
Yeah, it's very much having a very deep understanding of the diagnosis of each student that's in front of you. And that's not just their background, it's not just their prior achievement, but it's the strategies they actually use when they're in difficulty, when they don't know what to do, when they're in problems, because that's what our task is to teach kids those things they don't know. And then I would argue we need to have a very clear understanding of what that sort of Goldilocks principle of challenges, not too hard, not too boring. What are the success criteria that we're aiming for? And the more we can expose that to the students as they're doing their lessons, the more they're involved in reducing that gap from where they are to where you want them to be. But for the thing that I want to emphasize more than anything, and we're still working our own research in this area, is looking at sort of the cognitive richness, the cognitive complexity of tasks, as opposed to what you were hinting at, just the coverage of the content. There's nothing wrong with the content, but it's what the students, we want them to do with it, how we want them to relate it, extend it, be curious about it, be creative about it. And all those things require that you must know some things as well. So getting that balance right between the surface, the content, and the deeper relationships. And that's what I want to see more planned in the lesson planning than just, here's some interesting activities, and I'm sure the students will be engaged. And what's more, they may even like it. Well, learning's hard work. Sometimes we don't like hard work, but we need to.
We might fall in a trap when we are in the staff room planning our lessons, because I might share something with you believing that this would be profitable to your classroom, but not necessarily that is true.
Look,
right?
You're so right. Now, there's a dilemma here. There's a dilemma here. I don't want the implication to be that you shouldn't share resources with your colleagues. And oh my goodness, the internet has more lesson plans than you can ever imagine. And I don't want to go the other extreme and imply that you need to create everything for your class yourself, which is very much what happens in my country at the moment. What I'm more interested in, and I bet what you do, Rodrigo, is that you make adjustments. You make decisions at the moment about what's working, what's not working, how you're going about your teaching, how you need to change what you do so the students get the impact of what you do. And that's the essence of the great teaching. And that's why I'm much more interested in the sort of the cognitive task analysis of what happens and how teachers can see how students are thinking. Because of course, it's inside. You can't actually visibly see learning, which is kind of ironical given the name of my book. My book is about making learning more visible. How do you get students to articulate what they know and they don't know? How do you get them to ask for help when they're in situations where they need it? Now, that's a massive skill. And these are the things that you're paying attention to in the moment by moment of the classroom. And that's the expertise of teaching. So it's a balance. Let's do more shared resources. Nothing wrong with that. But the actual skill is in the implementation.
Perfect. Considering that a lot of our teachers, especially here in our country, they work for institutions sometimes that don't offer a comprehensive program of professional development. So they have to do things by their own. And how can novice teachers become more reflective about their own practices?
Yeah, Rodrigo, it's a pretty sad situation when schools don't have a robust and powerful professional learning system, because one of the highest impacts is that sense of collective efficacy, collective responsibility and confidence. We all can make a difference to student learning. But I also recognize that in some schools, particularly for new teachers, it's very lonely. And I do a lot of work in my own research here in Australia. And what we discovered is that teachers are actually incredibly big users of social media. So we've created quite a few apps where we get new teachers talking to each other, because if it's not happening in their school, we cannot afford to leave them by themselves. We have an app that a new teacher can go on and ask questions, and highly experienced teachers will come on and answer them, talk with them. We have about 17 to 20,000 hits a month on that particular app. And so, yes, you're right. It's how we can use, and I'm sure in your country, how you can use the power of social media and many, many different apps out there, TeachMeet and other kinds of apps, to get those teachers together, because we cannot afford them to be lonely. We cannot afford them to think they're going to solve all the problems by themselves. We cannot afford them to realize that there is incredible expertise out there. But sadly, sometimes it doesn't happen in their school. So it's not the answer, social media, but it certainly is one of the answers, particularly if the school is devoid, as you commented, on the lack of professional learning. Oh my goodness, we absolutely need to have that, particularly in our first few years. I do not want any teacher to think that their classroom is their kingdom.
And I would like to talk to you about, I don't know if you know, but we have a Brazilian community here on Facebook called Brelt. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
So I'm gonna share the link with you afterwards. It's a Facebook group. It's like more than 18,000 teachers connected there, and they have every 2 weeks online chats where we discuss topics, ELT related topics. They also have a yearly seminar. It's a one-day seminar where conference where we go there and we meet face to face. So it's exactly what you were saying. We cannot afford being lonely. So Braut has found a way to put those people together. Braut tries to do that, like to put teachers together no matter where they are. And Talking FL as well, like bringing people like you, sharing this fruitful and profitable information with novice teachers, with experienced teachers, because this is what I think our job is about, like putting people together and sharing practices, sharing experiences, right?
Yes. Oh, I think teachers in general are very generous. And so, yes, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a very powerful way. And it's interesting when you look at the distribution of experience on those sites, you do get a lot more teachers in their first 15 years because their world's different. Their world is about communication, their world is about sharing, and using social media is an invention of the last 10 or 15 years.
Yes.
Whereas the older teachers still want to physically get together, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm with you.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a totally new world out there that we should be exploiting dramatically to make sure
Yeah.
that teaching is a shared profession.
Yeah, make the most of what technology gives to us, provides us, right?
Well, it's kind of ironical that there's a lot of research, there's 150 meta-analyses on the uses of computers in classrooms, and
Uh-huh.
most of it ignore the fact that the biggest impact in the last 10 years has been teachers using social media to talk to each other. It's had a profound
Yes.
effect.
Yeah, it's an irony, but it's the truth. Well, speaking of that, you have delivered a TED talk around 2013, bringing some of the influences which have a greater impact in class. And why do you think some teachers around the world tend to still discuss issues with which are not impactful at all?
Because they think it's worked for them. They think
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting and engaging. And like many of those things that are at the bottom of the list are seductive. They sound attractive. And it's very easy to get up and defend them to your colleagues. And
Mm-hmm.
in many ways, the argument I'm saying is that, but I want to see and focus on the impact those procedures have on students, not on
Mm-hmm.
you. And I don't want
Okay.
you ever to blame the student because a system didn't work. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, like, I'm also intrigued, Gregory. I'm absolutely fascinated and spend quite a bit of research time researching to understand why some of those methods aren't very successful. Because I don't think the argument is that we shouldn't do them. My argument is
Mm-hmm.
we should know they're not working and improve them.
All right. Okay. Yeah, and especially using technology just for the sake of using it, right?
Yes.
And not because you are worried or you are using that as a facilitator of the process of teaching. It's just because sometimes it's beautiful, it looks good in class, it sells, right?
And like it goes back in many ways, sadly, some teachers think that a great classroom, a great activity is a function of what students do. And this
Mm-hmm.
notion of doing. And this is why I have a trouble with the notion, for example, of engagement, that we've got to
Mm-hmm.
engage students in interesting activities. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
the opposite way around, that as students learn, they become engaged. And so that notion of doing is so strong out there. And that's why when many teachers run programs that have very low impact, the students are
Mm-hmm.
still doing things. But I'm more
Mm-hmm.
focused on what are they learning, how they're being disruptive in their learning, how they're wanting to be more curious, how they want to be more engaged and deeper in the activity. And that's a different focus. Now, of
Mm-hmm.
course, many teachers are doing the latter, which means they have to worry about the doing. But sometimes the doing is the end point.
Okay, brilliant. We are getting there. There's another video in which you bring the concept of collective teacher efficacy. Could you explain a little what this is, and how about your work in Melbourne with the concept of collective wisdom of the group, of the crowd?
Well, yes, two good parts to that. Firstly, the collective efficacy is about all the adults in the school having appropriately high expectations that all the students can make a year's growth, at least a year's growth for a year's input, and therefore articulate what that notion of a year's growth or at least a year's growth looks like. And this is where we go back to our start of our conversation, Rodrigo, when we were talking about how we get particularly new teachers to form views of what expectations are so they have a sense of how well they're going in their impact on their kids. Now, one of the problems of collective efficacy, and it worries me that it's going to be misused, is that sometimes it's not about the right stuff. It's collective efficacy about our impact, not collective efficacy to share our resources. And so that's the first part. Now, the second part, the collective wisdom of the crowd, is a fascinating notion. In fact, we have quite a large research program going on that topic at the moment. And it's very hard to find evidence for the collective wisdom of the crowd, except when the level of social sensitivity is high. And some of our more experienced teachers may not be as socially sensitive to others as they need to be. And so how much turn taking is going on in the group? Is a person dominating? Is the group a function of the person who's the loudest or the person who's the brightest or the person the most experienced? This is where great leadership is needed to make sure that there is a lot of turn taking. There are people expressing their views. It is safe that to say, I don't know. And so getting that crowd to work is extremely difficult. Merely putting people together, contrived collegiality is, as Andy Hargraves talks about, is not the answer. So yes, it can be very powerful, but oh my gosh, it needs great leadership to make it work.
Could you explain more the goal of visible learning and the outcomes of it for the student, the teacher, and the school leader?
Well, you can imagine as the academic writing a book, you wonder whether anyone's ever going to touch it, let alone read it. The fact that people have is quite an honor. And so I never started out with the notion of doing anything other than writing up as one does as an academic. But now I do travel the world. I do see many, many teachers and schools working with the team that I have around the world and implementing this way of thinking into their school. And so, yes, I can see the impact on the students because that's where I sit back here in Melbourne. I get the evidence on the impact of the students, and it can be quite profound what that impact is. Making classrooms more inviting for them to come to, stretching their knowledge, stretching their understanding, stretching their curiosity, stretching their depth, and wanting to come and learn in this place called school. And so when you see that, it kind of is exciting to keep wanting to promote these ideas. And whilst there are critics out there of some of the work, I invite them to go into the classes of those teachers that are doing this and ask them about how are they thinking? Because if I have any influence in this world, I want to reintroduce that notion of teacher expertise.
Brilliant, brilliant. But I would like to ask you to send a message to all the Brazilian teachers watching you.
Well, my message to the Brazilian teachers is that at all times, go back to that moment when you made that decision to become a teacher. I would have a hunch that the majority of us went into this profession because we wanted to have an impact on students. My message in visible learning is as simple as that. How do we maximize that feeling, that belief, and that evidence that we have that we're having an impact on every one of the students in front of us? And to do that requires incredible expertise. And so I ask you in Brazil to really emphasize that notion of expertise. I know it's so easy to talk about conditions and pay and autonomy and curriculum and assessment, and they are all important. But the most important thing that's often forgotten is the expertise that's required to do our job, how we privilege that, how we build that into our system, and how do we get our parents, our politicians, our policymakers, and our press realizing that this is a job that requires incredible expertise. Best wishes out there.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, John. Thank you very
Roderick.
much.